Greetings, I am Tom Earl, and this is my year of courage. I know you could be anywhere, so the fact that you are here today, sharing your greatest gifts, your time and energy, it means the world to me. I hope you know that in this very space, you are appreciated and you are loved. Today's episode, we are going to go through a workshop on celebrating failure. And I know that it sounds counterintuitive, but one of the deepest lessons I've learned in really this 2019 year, in these past almost 6 months, is it is so core, it is so key to having a healthy relationship with failure. If you want to take risks, if you want to envision, if you want to dream, if you want to put yourself out there, then a part of that process is having these moments where we might fall short, where we try something and it doesn't work, where we take a risk and it doesn't turn out the way we had anticipated. And when failure becomes disempowering, rather than learning from that lesson, it can halt us, it can stop us. And sometimes what can happen is it can start to hurt our self-confidence, and then we start to take less risks. That was a tongue twister. We start to take less risks. We start to dream less. And ultimately, we shrink ourselves. And instead, when we have a healthy relationship with failure, we're able to have a growth mindset and move through those moments and seeing them as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to recalibrate. And so in a second, I'm going to step out of the way and we're going to go through a workshop that I facilitated for 3 other people. There are 3 people you've probably met before or heard on the celebration, or you know they're dear to my heart. Adora Wandu, who is now Adora Wandu Earl, was one of the participants. Tasneem Noor, who is a past guest. You can check out her interview, tomearl.com/Tasneem. And one of my good friends, Rami El Etcherby. Now, if you're a longtime listener of the celebration, you may have heard other replays of this workshop that I facilitated. It is a 7-day workshop that I facilitated for these 3 people, and then I put together as a course called Manifest Your Adventure within the Celebration Academy. I want to share with you specifically, this was day 6 within this workshop. So if you hear us referencing things from past days, that's why. However, the workshop is a standalone workshop. You don't necessarily need to have listened to the previous days to get a lot of value, to get context, and to really walk away with the healthy relationship from failure listening to this. One thing that I've done, as I do in a lot of these workshops that I share as podcasts, is I've eliminated the spaces where I say to folks, hey, why don't you take 5 minutes to do this? Instead of you just sitting there for 5 minutes in silence, I've cut out those 5 minutes of silence. And so what I would suggest is if you're following along at home, you just pause and you go through and write everything that I invite you to write and then push play again. There are other parts where while the participants were thinking, I will actually share some writing prompts for you as well. So whether you're going for a walk or you're listening to this at work, if you don't have a chance to write down your thoughts, just think of them as you're driving or walking. And when you get a chance, you can write them down when you have a moment. So that about covers the introduction. I'm going to get out of the way and allow you to go through this phenomenal workshop called Celebrating Our Failures. And I'll come say goodbye before we head out. So let me get out of the way. Here we go. Here's what we're going to do next. I am going to put an assortment of random objects onto this table.
Doctor's in the house.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, wait, what's he called? The sesame... Elmo. Cookie Monster.
And for the folks listening at home, as you can hear from people's excitement, some of the things I'm putting on the table include the Cookie Monster, Elmo. We have a really cool stuffed animal dragon, some random household things like eye drops, a container of dental floss, a broken cell phone, all random things that I've collected along my journey and include in my facilitation bag. And now I've dumped it onto the table. It's all laid out for people. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I want you to grab an object that to you represents failure.
Oh.
I want you to grab an object that to you represents failure. For those listening at home, look around you. Maybe you're cleaning the house, you're driving, you're working out, you're going for a walk. Look around you and find one thing that represents to you what failure means. All right. We all have our things. As always, there's no right or wrong way, whatever you come to. And who would like to start by describing your object and why it means failure to you?
I will describe mine. Mine's a badge that says I'm a volunteer from. And I love volunteering. I do it all the time. I've been dedicated to various organizations. But I also do the thing I love, which is directing and writing, often without any sort of financial reward. And if the rest of my life looked like doing those things I love without any sort of financial reward, and if I wasn't getting a financial reward elsewhere, then that would feel like failure. So I don't want to be volunteering my gifts out of being forced to volunteer my gifts. I want to only volunteer because I want to.
That's awesome. Thank you, Adora.
I'll go with it. It's like, I don't know what it's called, but it's like this connected thing, and it's all, what is this?
No idea. I was curious to hear how you
it's kind of like this thing that looks all swirly, and it's fully connected, but I'm trying to straighten it out, and I can't. And I think success, what was the question? Success, failure? What failure look like? Yeah. So failure to me is it looks confusing, it looks chaotic, and no matter how hard you try, you can't simplify it, you can't straighten it. So that frustration of not being able to have the clear vision or the clear pathway, not knowing the destination, if you've ever reached the destination, and like just this sense of just being frustrated with that stuff. I think is failure. Yeah.
What were you about to say?
I was just going to say that playing with this thing is fun. If only failure felt like fun.
If only, right?
We could create a whole piece of theater out of that.
Yeah. Nice.
I'm excited to see what yours is, Rami.
On my next?
Yeah.
For me, I found these goggles in the pile, and I'm wearing them, and they're smudged. I would prefer to not be wearing them. But the longer I'm wearing them, I'm getting used to wearing them. And for me, I feel like failure is sort of allowing your vision, allowing you to kind of be inhibited, to sort of for allowing your dreams to sort of get blurry, and putting on things that make you might feel safe. You're protecting yourself. You're protecting your eyes. You don't want to get hurt. And so you're wearing these things. But truthfully, you would probably be able to see clearer without them.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rami.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I grabbed prayer beads. I've noticed that the times in my life where I become the most prayerful and introspective and pondering of life's deeper meanings is during my greatest failures. That's really when I start to be like, what is life? Why am I here? What was this about? Whereas success, I just always get this feeling of I'm doing everything right. Everything's going well. So I think of like in the Quran or Hadith, it just says sometimes God has us stumble so God can hear us cry his name. So I think of different things like that there's always a deeper meaning behind my failures.
I like that.
That one had a reaction.
At first I was like, oh, like that, like her prayer beads represent failure, and I felt
I know.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Me too.
Yeah. I was
okay.
like, how is he going to turn that one
Oh,
around?
that's what was going
I
on.
literally
Okay.
was
Yeah.
like, what's his problem?
Because God just never answers my prayers. Okay.
Exactly.
So it's like a relief. Like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
He's about to say prayer is failure.
Oh. we talked about success, so we should talk about failure. I think there's a lot of tension in failure. There's a lot of, on our trip, you know how one of our previous lessons, we talked about we're going on an adventure. I think a lot of the baggage that would hold us down on that trip is what we think failure is. Am I incorrect in that? Do you think there's truth in it?
There is truth.
So I think getting to explore what failure is. You know, has anybody heard of the underwear Spanx?
No.
Shapewear.
It's shapewear. Shapewear. Okay. You might have seen this. You can Google this. The founder of Spanx, who I think was one of the youngest female billionaires in the history of the world. Right? Isn't this true? Yeah.
Maybe.
One of the youngest female billionaires.
Something you would know.
Yes. So by every stretch of the imagination or stretch of the fabric, very successful, right? So she talks about how during dinner every day with her dad, what he would have them do is tell them one thing they failed at that morning or that day. And so they'd go around and however big the failure was, you'd get an amazing round of applause from your whole family. And so every single day they celebrated their failure. So she said she attributes that to much of her success, that she always, whenever she'd fail, it'd get her excited. Like, oh, this is amazing. You know, so I think for me, I've really found that having a healthy relationship with failure is so important to accomplishing your dreams. And there's so many examples that seem to bring something up for you.
Yeah, just that idea resonates with me so much, and it is so true, and there are examples, endless examples of it. And yet when I'm in that space of feeling like a failure, somehow it's hard to remember it then.
Exactly.
And yeah.
So I think that's a good segue, is that what we want to do is come up with a belief structure around what is failure. Because oftentimes when we go from our feelings, when failure feels crappy, it feels sometimes shameful, it feels embarrassing, going from the feeling place can keep us in that. But instead, if we go to our core belief that, yes, I'm feeling terrible, but I believe failure is something to be celebrated, getting grounded in our identity of failure, our belief of failure, can give us a pathway out of those feelings. So that's what we want to focus on in this next part. Before we do that, though, let's just take a refresher of how we've built up to this moment. Really, this started with yesterday's workshop on success. We started with 2 truths and 1 lie. That was a lot of fun. Then we talked about what have we been told success is. And we named it, brought self-awareness to ourselves of what have I been taught by my society, my culture, my friends, my family, what success is. And then moved into what does success mean to me through hot potato, hot pig. And started to find that some things we saw was success is, yes, some tangible things like what we talked about for our vision, but also success is values, it's ideas, it's ideals, it's something internal. So we moved into then talking about failure because our beliefs around failure can hold us back if they're not empowering. If every time I fail, I start to feel down and that it's just not worth it, or everybody's laughing at me, or we even have a phrase, I feel like a failure. And if that means is a negative connotation, that's going to always be there hanging over us. What if I fail? That was one of our questions. What would I do if I believed I could not fail? We gave the example of the Spanx founder and how she was taught to celebrate failure. And one thing we've all heard is previously Tessney mentioned the almost failures, how people like Michael Jordan failed a bunch of times, or Steve Jobs was fired from his own company. Sticky notes, has anybody ever used a sticky note? Yeah. So sticky notes were actually invented to not be able to tear off. They were supposed to be able to stick as hard as glue can and to not come off. And so it was actually a failure. And when they first invented it, it was deemed a failure. So they threw it to the side. And then a new director of that company came and went to the person who created it and said, I'm curious about what we can actually do with this. Instead of looking at it as a failure, what do you think are some strengths? One thing they found is that it's nice that if you can make it stick by applying pressure. So you stick it to it and you make it stick by applying pressure. The other is that you can actually tear it off, but it won't come off on its own. You tear it off, and when you tear it off, it doesn't leave a mark on the wall. They're like, what if we try to do something with this? And they marketed it and became sticky notes, and there's sticky note art, there's sticky note phenomenons. I mean, for some people, I don't know what they do without sticky notes. And that was actually a failure. And I think if we really think about it, we've probably all heard stories like this of times where a failure what turned into a success. But what I'm most curious to know is, what were times like that in your life? So what I'd like you to do is write down 3 times a failure led to something wonderful.
3 times?
3 times. A failure led to something wonderful. And so as you're listening along with us, I want you to think of, what were 3 times a failure led to something wonderful? Could be something big, could be a little failure, could be something that during it didn't seem like it would lead to something wonderful, but in retrospect, you realize, if that didn't happen in my life, I wouldn't be where I am right now. Was it a failure in a relationship? Was it in business? Was it when you were younger? Something that happened this week? Anytime in your life, what were 3 times a failure led to something wonderful? Okay. Who would like to share
Fun.
one of them? What's fun?
It wasn't. I was actually being facetious, but I'll talk about it. What wasn't fun about this was... I'm sorry, is that a future question? Like,
No, go
how
ahead.
was it?
No, start there.
Okay. It's not fun to think about your failures and to think about all the like sadness and frustration and hurt feelings that that surrounded that. It is nice to think about, oh, if that never happened, then this wouldn't have happened. But I guess maybe the last, you said only one?
You can share. Go ahead. Whatever you're called to do.
Well, if I'm going to share one, it would probably be like, the last relationship I was in. We're getting deep, personal, and vulnerable. It was a while ago, maybe 7 years ago. And I'm not the type of person to have been in relationships. And so that was the last one. It's single is a lot easier. But I would say that relationship kind of failed really quickly, kind of like crashed and burned in a way that was unanticipated. And it made me feel like a huge failure. Like I was an idiot to even go on that journey because it crashed and burned like so obviously. That I felt like I could have anticipated it. However, it sparked a depression and it made me kind of want to switch up my life. So I looked into, and it put me in a very sort of contentious place with like my parents at the time. So I decided to look into going to like grad school in New York City, like on the other side of the country, mostly as a way to like get away and escape my life and give myself something else to do that seemed fun. And I'm so grateful I did that. I'm so grateful. I don't know, say that relationship worked out and say I was happy. Then I don't think I would have gone on this other journey of going to the other side of the country. I mean, that can be unpacked. That's escaping, that's running away from your problems. And it's not like the problems were gone after that. But I would say if I wasn't in that sort of place of wanting an escape, I probably wouldn't have made this decision to like really invest in my professional life, which it was a good distraction from my personal life. 7 years later, I can invest now more maybe in my personal life.
It's awesome. Can we show Rami some love?
For sure.
Thank you, Rami. We appreciate you being personal and vulnerable.
No, thank you. You're welcome.
Who would like to share next?
I have a few that are like that. My first one's easy, and it was just a tiny bit of disappointment followed by great things. When Tom Earl didn't show up to our very first date. at all.
Not at
while I
all.
was there.
20 minutes late.
At all while I was there. I was already home by the time he turned up, and it turned out to be
20 minutes late. But go ahead. This is your
turned
story.
out to be a
My
great
jaw
great
is
thing.
on the floor.
My second one was maybe 15 years ago. I was up for the job of secretary at the BBC, and it was going to be my foot into the BBC, just working as a lowly secretary, and I was so excited, and I was like, the job's in the bag, I'm overqualified for this, and I didn't get it. And the person was like, you are just not right to be a secretary at the BBC, you should be trying to direct at the BBC, not be a secretary. I'm like, I just need a foot in. But I went into the bathroom, I cried and cried and cried, and then wiped my tears. And years later, I can absolutely look back and say, yes, they're completely right. I'd probably still be working there, maybe a high up executive, making business decisions, but not any creative ones, most likely, or not me creating. So I think that was good. And then the other one's very similar to Rami's as well, in that was a guy I crushed on so hard at university. I was convinced we were going to marry and be together, and that he was just the most impressive person ever. But that didn't happen. And the first few years, I was like, but why? It made so much sense. But now I see if I had gotten together with him, I would have spent all my life following him around, because he's one of these alpha high achievers, and I'd be supporting his career and in his shadow and completely subsumed, and wouldn't have any chance to have come here at all.
Wonderful. Can we show Adora some love?
I mean, I can share all, but I don't know how much you want me to share. Well, the very first one that came to mind was actually in terms of my professional, like in a facilitation capacity. And, you know, I love what I do, and I really want to be my best in creating that safe space and moving the conversation forward and all of it. And in that moment when it didn't happen and when I kind of froze, it felt really bad. Like it felt like I was not doing the thing that I know I'm supposed to be doing. But the cool part about it was a session or two later, there were at least 4 or 5 people who spoke about that very moment where I felt I had failed. And it was like a transformative thing for them. Like that's the moment from the whole time that they took out and walked away with and found real meaning in. And so that was really grateful. I mean, not grateful. I was really grateful that sometimes, you know, because I was willing to see beyond just how I was feeling or thinking, others actually got a lot out of it. So that was neat. There was this time when I was still working I used to work on a college campus. And I've always been that one person, you know, that everyone thinks is the nicest, and people are like, do you ever get mad? And so with this particular student, she like literally called me incompetent and did this whole like complaint against me. And she thought I was incompetent and my supervisor was like deceitful. So I was like, okay, I'll take incompetent over deceitful. That was, of course, just her perception. But in that moment, like, you know, I remember feeling really frustrated and angry and justified and like, what does she think and this and that. And what I really remember and appreciate about that tension is I just owned it. Like, you know, in the meeting where I was supposed to respond to her and explain my side, I went to my supervisor ahead of time and told him whatever I needed to tell him. And in that space, I just held my ground and said, I have nothing to say to someone who doesn't trust me. And that was it. You know, so I found my own power to kind of honor myself in that way when I was really pushed and questioned. I mean, my integrity was questioned. So that was pretty powerful. And the other one that's coming to mind is just based on Rami and Adora's share. there was a proposal, and everyone was excited and happy, and I thought it was really going to go somewhere, and he ended up saying no. And I remember when I hung up the phone, because it was over the phone, my first reaction was, thank you, God. And I wasn't like madly in love with him, but I was definitely like way ahead in terms of, okay, we're getting married, I'm moving to Seattle. I'm like, I told my job people everything. And but that was my first reaction. Looking back at it now, it would have been kind of like you, where I would have lost myself somehow, because I didn't know at that time, I didn't value myself the same way that I do now. So I'm very grateful, not only for him saying no, but for me just intuitively not understanding it, but knowing that it was an opportunity to say thank you, God.
That's awesome.
So
Can we show Tessie some?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Love. What a loser.
His loss completely.
That's a big loss.
One of the ones I have is that the place I moved to Florida for in search of watermelons ended up being this amazing experience. Amazing. The community, I've never had a community where I felt so safe. I think it really allowed me to explore who am I. It's where I converted to Islam and just really got to be who I am. I loved the work. It's where I learned facilitation, which is now one of my purposes in life. And I did AmeriCorps Vista, so I volunteered in service to America there for 2 years, and kind of had been told there's a possibility you might get to work here. And then my last day came, and there was no funding for the job. I was like, I'll never find somewhere as amazing as this. I've peaked. This was my thriller. I'll never write a song this good. Then I started to apply for jobs, and it was a job where I had been at every single high school in the 2 counties, and where I had networked with maybe 50 to 60 nonprofits. So everybody knew me, and I was like, well, then I'll get a job for sure. And I applied to all the places I worked at, and there's just nothing. I heard nothing back. And so I was like, you know what then? I'm going to LA.
Yeah.
And just packed up my car again. I set up a poetry tour between Florida and LA to pay for the trip, where I'd stop every night. They'd fill up my gas tank, give me a place to stay and something to eat. And my last show was in LA. And here I am. And I know if I would have got hired there, I probably wouldn't have left. Would have just stayed there. And all of this would have never happened. Every single person at this table, ooh, I'm getting goosebumps. I was like, wow, every person here. So, that to me was that was a triumph. A failure that turned into a triumph.
The road you didn't take.
Exactly. Yeah. What's kind of bubbling to the surface of what failure means for your life?
I kept thinking of more and more things that at the time just seemed horrible. And I do have to be honest, there are some things that were horrible then, and still now I see no sense in them. But yeah, a lot of them have really turned out to be for the better in not too a distance after they happen. Yeah.
I do believe there's a lesson in everything. Every failure is an opportunity. Every failure is a message from God. I do believe in that intuition of thanking God for whatever does happen, even if it feels awful, and even if you're angry. Thank you, but I'm angry at you right now. I think there's always been some sort of like treasure or gem, even from like the worst experiences, that you can like take away.
Tasneem?
I mean, I'm agreeing. In this moment, reflecting back on the failures, I'm like, yay, grateful. But again, going back to when I'm actually in that space, or even now, right, when the doubts or the fears or that sense of, oh, I'm not doing well or I'm not there yet, like when those things come up, it's still, it's hard to tap into the gratitude in those moments.
Does anybody resonate with that from Tasneem? Does anybody find it like, yeah, when you have me in this moment, Tom, Like, yeah, go failure. But when I fail,
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Very true.
I definitely, yes, I agree, but I definitely always try to like see all the good things I have. You know what I mean? Like the whole count your blessings, it's cliche, but even when I'm failing, there's always some really good stuff going on in my life, you know? Like just the fact that I'm safe.
Yeah.
And but I get it. It's hard to feel grateful. Yeah, I push myself to like recognize, oh, I'm warm, I'm fed, stuff like that, you know.
What do you think that failure or a fear of failure has any obstacle or a barrier for really going for it, really going for your dream, really going on that adventure we drew? Is that an issue, or has that ever come up, or is this like,
I feel as if my privileged position in life, from all sorts of reasons, means that the stakes aren't that high for me. At least for the next 20, 30 years, I know I have enough social capital, family and friends, where I will probably always have a roof over my head and food on the table. I'm worried about beyond that when we're all old and aren't able to, but up until then, it's fine. So failure for me would be about shame and embarrassment. It wouldn't be, I won't be able to go on and feed myself or my family.
I think that's for me too. A lot of the failure that I fear is the ridicule or the being laughed at or cyberbullying or something like that. You know what I mean? More than becoming homeless or dying. The extreme things.
Yeah. I think for me, I definitely have those thoughts, and unconsciously or consciously, it does definitely slow me down. If not it stop me, it does slow me down. But I think my biggest fear is living off purpose, not being true to who I am. And in that sense, that fear of failure, that failure of not being true to who I am is much bigger than any other fear. And so it helps me to, always respond to the other stuff with gratitude or like, no, resilience or whatnot to keep me going.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that resonates with me, what Tasneem just said. I feel like what I do fear is like facing myself and not feeling like I didn't try hard enough or I didn't apply myself hard enough. Like I feel like if I'm going to go after it, I need to be successful because I don't want to be like 60, 70, not living in my purpose. I just imagine a very depressing future if that's the case. But it's not about being, I'll say it's ridicule, what other people think of me. Thankfully, I feel like I'm just so grateful for that seems to not be as a huge concern for me right now. It's really about me.
Thank you for sharing that. That reminds me of our why, because that's really what's at stake. Is when we talked about our adventure, we talked about what we already have, what the epic journey looks like, but then the why that's bigger than your worry. What's at stake that's even bigger than my worry? But a lot of what the worry is the fear of failure or the fear of the things we've been talking about, rejection or when I'm older, failing or something like that. So we've kind of to move past the worry. We've thought of a why that's bigger, but let's also address the worry head on. And so kind of to culminate this experience of talking about failure is I would like to invite us to write a manifesto of failure. What is failure to you in an empowering perspective? What ways does failure strengthen who you are? What ways does failure have you go a different direction? Or what ways can you embrace failure so that you see it as something that strengthens you rather than something to be feared? So,
I don't know if I understand. What would be an example of that?
Of what it might sound like? Failure is an opportunity. failure leads to a new path.
Okay.
That's always led to something better. Failure is a time for me to pray and to reflect. Without failure, I would always continue on this same path, and it'd be predictable and straight, and life is boring without it. So some sort of almost a motivational speech, but like a manifesto in that this is what it is. Failure is awesome. So something diving into this empowering perspective that we're trying to cultivate around failure. So can be a sentence, can be a paragraph, can be a picture, whatever way you'd like. I'll give you some time to work on that. And for the folks listening at home, whether you're multitasking or writing the poem in the moment, you can ignore me. You can pause this. Or you can, if you'd like, follow the prompts I'm giving to inspire what you're writing. I want you to think ahead and write yourself a manifesto of what failure means to you. For those times in the future where maybe you doubt your path. Those times where maybe you pause and you start to slip into old habits where failure means that you messed up, that you're not good enough, that you're not enough. And let this be a time capsule of positive energy to infuse you in those moments. So tell me, what is failure to you? What does it mean? As we talked about, where would you be without those times where you tried and didn't succeed at first? So instead, you dug down deep, you found it, and you went through it, you became even stronger, and your success tasted even sweeter than it did had you succeeded right from the beginning. Tell me, what does failure mean to you? What positive mindset? What psychology of empowerment? What encouragement can you provide yourself right now? Create that mental memory. Our brains, they're like our muscles, and that they start to have habits and patterns that we fall into. So what conscious way of thinking do you want to create right now around failure? What does it mean? What do you want to remind yourself of? In a second, we're about to come back with the group, so I want you to just, for a little bit longer, feel that positive emotion you feel right now. That excitement, that motivation, that energy. Remember this, and anytime you start to feel the old way of thinking about failure come back into your life, I want you to come back to this place and read this poem that you're writing for yourself. Either you're writing it right now on paper or you're writing it in your mind right now. And here we go. We're going to join the group again. Who would like to share theirs first?
I'll go.
Okay.
I wrote it pretty quickly. It's only one line, and it says, failure closes the doorways that are not meant for me to cross through.
Ooh, snap that up.
That's why I was like, I'm done.
That's amazing. Thank you, Rami.
You're welcome.
Who would like to share next?
I have a couple. Failure is a step to success. It is an opportunity to grow and become a better version of myself. Failure is scary and uncomfortable, but it is also fun and adventurous. And I think my favorite one that somehow it's resonating really deeply is loving your failures is loving yourself unconditionally.
Oh, we like that one. We snap it up for Tasneem.
Failure leads to new, fresh, and less obvious ideas. Failure reminds me of my humility and connects me to compassion and empathy. And failure is like tearing a muscle, which is rebuilt much stronger than the old one.
Oh.
Oh.
Yes. I like that. That's literally how you build strength. That's awesome. I wrote, failure is freeing. It is not a dungeon of doom or gloom. It is the storm that gives life to seeds and trees. It brings appreciation for the sun. It is perspective. It is natural. It is fun. It is vulnerability in action. It is the beauty and adorableness of a child learning to walk, crawl, stumble, get up, try again. It is a river finding its way. It is a bird making a nest out of scraps and discarded things. It is strings worn out and snapping from overuse to be replaced for a new day. Failure is not to be feared, but embraced.
Oh, poetry.
Yeah.
Whole failure poem.
Like,
Couldn't help it. How does it feel right now? How are you feeling? I'm seeing a lot of smiles.
yeah.
I'm enjoying the idea of failure right now, but it does bring me back to, I wish I could fail in private. Just not have anyone there while it's happening, and I'd be okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it's because we have this collective grasp of failure is wrong. And so that's like why we're afraid to see each other fail. But if around this table, if we failed, it'd be like, yay, because we love failure.
For me, failure, I feel like it hurts those around me. My failure hurts those around me more than it actually hurts myself. So if I could spare them the pain, because I know everything's going to be okay, but they don't have the same faith. So that's why I think it's so painful.
I feel the opposite. Just I feel like my failures only affect me, and a lot of people around me have no idea what the failures are, and they never need to know. So my failures are my own struggles that I'm constantly dealing with that are not for other people's knowledge.
So I think that failures, if we think of like a wagon wheel, they go on or like a train track. For a lot of us, that track has been laid for years and years and years. So even now I notice we'll be like, oh yeah, failure. But what about this? And then like the smiles will be gone. So I think that this is the one I would just invite us to practice. And when we talk about forming habits around visualization, we'll have some habits around celebrating failure. Because I think it's a tough one. That we feel that excitement that failure is something that can be celebrated. And we've heard the sticky note story and the Steve Jobs story. Oh, but then once you're in it, it's something that can be lost quickly. And once again, failure feels something embarrassing and it sucks. So I think just whenever we can, just trying to practice that attitude of gratitude around failure or that this manifesto. So I encourage coming back to this and reading this, because if we just go off how we're feeling around failure, then it's hard to get out of there. But if you have an identity around failure, that for me, my belief, my identity is that failure is something to celebrate. Failure is an opportunity. All these things we wrote, then we can come back and get grounded in that when we move forward. So we'll definitely include that in our practices. Tasneem, any last thoughts?
Nothing burning. Sitting with it.
Okay, wonderful. So today we've talked about success and failure, because they're necessary conversations to have if we're going to go on an epic journey of stupendous adventure. How we want to conclude today is we're going to pull out another friend. This one's Dreaming Dragon.
Oh.
Not a doctor.
Yay.
They're all doctors so that we don't have to use any gender descriptors, because I haven't been able to ask them their gender pronouns. So we just say doctor. That's really the reason for the doctor. This is Dreaming Dragon. So I want you to hang out. We're going to go around. You can hold Dreaming Dragon and just share anything that's coming up for you around dreaming as big as a blue dragon flying around. Aww. So really go into nothing holding you back. Any thoughts coming up around your dreams, your hopes, around failure, success, anything you want to use to take us home. We'll start over here with Tasneem.
I'm flying. In this moment, it's just feeling like, yeah, it's possible. It's possible. I'm on my way. The journey has already begun. It's just the next level, right? So I'm feeling hopeful. I'm feeling grateful, and I'm ready to embrace the journey with the turns and the twists and the ups and the downs, and remember that loving my failures is loving myself unconditionally.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Dreaming Dragon. Similar to what Tasneem was saying, it's about staying in that place of hope and optimism. And what you were saying about the wagon wheels, which happens to be a chocolatey, marshmallowy dessert where I used to live. But in this instance, yes, it's so easy to leave that place of hope and optimism and go to a place of safety, which is kind of terrible things about to happen. And if you stay here and you don't expect great things, you won't hurt yourself, and it's fine. But I will join Dreaming Dragon and always try and remind myself to fly. Yeah, stay away from the safe and shallow ground.
Woohoo.
What's up, Dreaming Dragon? I have been thinking, not to make it too cliche, but this conversation about failures and loving them makes me think of this like Rumi poem about this being human as a guest house, where you entertain all your visitors, whether it's like sadness or lament or joy or illness. You have to entertain them all, because that's all what makes you human. And sometimes the really awful guests are the ones that clear you out, so you could be open to the beautiful guests that come.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Rami. And I'm thinking of how to really achieve greatness, you have to start with the imagination. That if I can't imagine it, if I can't let that creativity fly unbound rather than held down by all these different things I've been taught and stuff, that I'll never be able to have a dream as amazing and as unimaginable as a flying blue dragon. So that's what that inspires for me, is just to continually free my imagination to create those visions and hopes. Can we snap it up for ourselves?
And for
Really
Dreaming
appreciate-
Dragon.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, so much. Appreciate y'all being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Love
you.
it.
And thank you to everyone listening along with us here today. This has truly been a powerful workshop. Oftentimes we have intentional conversations on success, but we rarely take time to have a truly purposeful conversation on failure. And as a side note, I would love to read your manifesto on failure. And if you're willing to, please send me an email with it, tom@tomearl.com. I'd love to read it. I promise I won't share it. As we come together as a community to redefine what failure means, we start to support each other. As we talked about during this workshop, some folks said that oftentimes it seems that it's people's reactions that makes failure hard, and that if it was just us here at this table with this empowering belief in failure, then we could move from one failure to the next without it ever feeling like we have to pause and get down about it. And so would love to read yours. And like anything, the way we learned failure and the disempowering connotations that it often has was through repetition. Our brain is a muscle. Our brain learns things and can be reshaped. New pathways can be formed through the same repetition that it was created to begin with. And so the more and more we lean into this empowering perspective on failure, the more we tap back into our failure manifesto, the more you celebrate your failures, the quicker we will be able to create new pathways of meaning within our nervous system, within our emotions, and within our brains. And like the Spanx example we gave, when we create an empowering meaning for failure, then it doesn't hold us back. Instead, we can celebrate it, and we will become emboldened, and we will become courageous and moving forward on our epic adventure, rather than a lot of times holding ourselves back from fear of what failure will mean. I want to thank you once again for listening to this workshop. If you enjoyed this workshop we went through, or any of the other replays I've been sharing with you throughout this 2019 and past year, I would like to invite you to join the Celebration Academy as an Inner Power Business Coaching member. Inner Power is an immersion program where each session you get the opportunity to ask any questions that you have. We go through empowering workshops like the one you just listened to. And you're provided with a diverse community of entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and creatives such as yourself. I'd love to invite you to join our community and become an Inner Power member. You can learn more and sign up at tomearl.me/innerpower. In case you don't know already, we do have a pay what you can scholarship program for Inner Power, which means whether you want to pay $1 or $300, whatever you can pay, we would be grateful for you to be a part of our community. So I would love to see you as a member. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me, tom@tomearl.com. Otherwise, all of the information, once again, tomearl.me/innerpower. I want to thank you once again for listening to this week's episode. I am truly grateful to have you as part of my community, and I look forward to seeing you next week. As always, I'm wishing you peace and blessings. Thank you. One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching.